Bob was here, and I said now that Ed was here, and Diana, and Judy. I guess I didn't say that to you, Professor. Sorry.
From here.
Or to Terry or Chris. All right, we'll bring the meeting to order, and this is the Economic Industrial Development Commission. Today is Wednesday, the 26th, and we're going to have a pretty full agenda today, which includes, for those that may be listening to this broadcast, we're going to have Judy Gott, who is Executive Director of the Council of Governments for the area. That's the group of the 15 mayors and first selectmen that comprise the South Central Connecticut region. And it's an arc of cities and towns from Milford up to Wallingford, out to Madison, at all points in between. And they act as a quasi-county government, because in Connecticut we don't have county government, and Judy is the brain trust of that organization. And she has been invited to the meeting to discuss issues along our commuting corridor of Route 69, Litchfield Turnpike, and 63, which is Amity Road, that of course feed into Whaley Avenue. And those who travel know that it's pretty heavy during rush hour, and Judy's going to shed some light in terms of what is under potential examination by the state to alleviate that congestion. We're also going to look briefly at this architect review group that sets some standards. They're an architect review board that was put into existence by current regulations when the town planning and zoning board was, new regulations were put into effect about 2 years ago. And that architect review board works with the town planning and zoning board to give them recommendations on a variety of ways to make buildings and the sidewalks and the environment surrounding development very pleasant and pleasing and consistent with how we want to create character for our commercial district. And then we're going to hear an update on Phase 1 work from Professor Paul Plattus from Yale, who has been working with our group. I might add that Chris and Terry are here to shed a little light on this architectural review board. So we've got a pretty busy schedule that we're going to try to move effectively to get this through in the next hour or so. With that said, Judy, why don't you start us off?
The other thing to say about Judy's a former first selectman of Branford, so
that's right.
Experience in town government for a number of years and did a fine job in Branford.
Good point. Our first selectman, and she who is joining us today. Judy.
I thank you for inviting me, number one, today, because I think it's important that as a region we try to get out, especially from the Council of Government standpoint, to let you know what is happening in the region, in particular the questions you might have about your own town that we might be able to either help you with or shed some light on. So that's why I'm here, and I'm very happy to answer questions. This project, or many of these projects involving the exits of Route 15, 63 and 69, have been ongoing since 2003 with our Council of Governments, just so you know that. We did a traffic study in 2003 and did traffic counts, made some recommendations as far as some minor improvements that could help traffic flow along those arteries. We reported then in 2005 to the DOT asking them to fund a complete study and actual construction of some of these simpler needs. We call them intermediate and long-term and short-term. So we had some suggestions for all so they didn't have to do everything. Well, when DOT took a look at our application in 2005, and by the way, the three mayors and first selectmen at the time of Bethany, Woodbridge, and New Haven all signed off on that application and asked the state for assistance in trying to solve the traffic problem that you do have here. We applied for funding from the state. They received their funding through the federal government. The state started to look at this project and said, what you've done and what you've talked about are simple traffic solutions, but we think there's a bigger problem here. So we want to do our study and create an overall area scope of services where we can identify all the needs and correct them all at one time rather than more or less a corridor study. So we agreed to that. However, as anything goes, and as you've all been reading with the DOT, things bogged down, and there was no money to continue with this, and so the state put it on the shelf. And then when First Selectman Sheehy came into office, he resurrected the question, and we reapplied. DOT has since found some funding in what they call safety money, and we had a meeting just recently with DOT back on February 25th, and that meeting resulted in the fact that DOT is now finally undertaking the study. They're going to be setting up committees that will work with people like yourselves within the community to help them scope the entire area and be sure that we've heard all of the difficulties and not just made up our mind based on the history of our '03 data, but what's there today, what's going on today. I don't think it's encouraging to tell you that this will take a number of years, because you've been hearing that for a number of years. But it is true. The study is only one part of it. Then there has to be money found. It can either be federal, state, and as you know, our state's taken on a real avid position now with transportation in general, whether it's transit or highway, but congestion mitigation, helping our environment really is the basis for it. So we're very optimistic that this study will move forward. Again, I think it was the prodding of all of your collective board members and selectmen and legislators in the state that have said to the state, you can't ignore COG's request anymore. This is a very important area to the region for economic
If we look at a timetable, as you said, the study now has been funded, and how long will the study take in terms of if the clock starts because they've gotten approval, and then maybe you could share how the study, when completed after X number of months, has to be reviewed, and then you go into a design stage, because you can't get funds unless you have a design, and then there's the funding stage, and then there's the construction stage. So if you look at those, maybe there's more, but if we look at those 4 phases.
We're talking 18 months for the study itself.
Okay.
All right. It could be even 24 months. They're saying that, in fact, I'll give you a copy of the notes here. It says this study is expected to begin in early '09. So they're scoping it now. They're getting the consultants. They're going to get the group together to put the scope together. So they haven't really begun the work. They've only begun to put the pieces together to get the consultant on board.
Do towns, excuse me to interrupt, I don't mean that, but I'm thinking of questions as we go along. And feel free, anyone that may want to ask Judy, but does the town get a chance to look at that scope before it goes out for a vendor to do it?
Absolutely, the town will be part of the group. And anyone from the town that the town recognizes as maybe an agency or staffing or citizenry that they feel would be a good contributor to this particular group. So there'll be plenty of town input. There'll be public meetings.
So there could be a public meeting here, of which they would give the parameters. We'll have a chance to say, well, couldn't you do this, couldn't you do that?
Absolutely. Right, that's all part of the process when you use federal funding, and this is safety money from the federal safety lieu bill.
Good.
So you do have to have a public process as part of that, including, as I've indicated, the Public Advisory Committee.
Okay.
I have a question. You mentioned early on in your talk about on February 25th they found money to run a study on the entire area. And I wasn't sure what that meant, if it meant, you know, multiple towns, or if we're talking specifically to our issue here in our community.
What we're talking, the study area includes Route 15 at Pond Lily. I can give you a copy of this before I finish it. It lists
Okay.
all the intersections that will be included. Route 15 at Pond Lily, Route 15 at 69, 69 between Route 15 and the ramps at Merritt. I mean, it's then continuing down Route 63 to Fowler Street and the drive to the Amity Shopping Center, Route 63 at 69 and right. Now, if those areas are not what you all find to be the correct area, that can be adjusted also. This advisory group that will be working with them before they actually put the final scope together and hire the consultant to actually do the design and complete it.
Obviously, with the interchange with 15, that's a bottleneck. But equally, I think, well, also significant is when those Amity and Litchfield feed into Whaley. Has anything been done in New Haven to take a look at the flow of traffic down Whaley and how that sort of narrows down through Westville or pans out over into Forest? Has something been going on that...
Actually, there's a planning study being done right now by COG for the Westville area and Route 10. And a lot of it is to relieve congestion. And so I can't say that that will result in better traffic flow for Woodbridge, but it will certainly look, I know just now coming through Westville, I mean, that was worse than your intersections here. That's where the bottleneck is.
Because we solved one bottleneck, which is the entree into that area, the route, the Merritt, or the Wilbur Cross at that point. But you know, as people continue into New Haven, and we had, I think, around 40% of Woodbridge's population has a job in New Haven. We had a very high percentage of Woodbridge residents that work in New Haven. So that obviously is a concern because we're feeding into Whaley, and with that, there's congestion there.
Well, one of the things that we looked at originally was the fact that the three towns, really, Bethany, Woodbridge, and New Haven, all had to be part of this, in that particular area also. So we gave the state the study and what we have requested. They're not going to eliminate that. They're going to add to it.
Okay, as long as that's good that they're aware of it.
But I think that we very much aware of it, but I think that if the town of Woodbridge wants to make it a major part of this, New Haven would certainly be willing to adjust whatever is going on currently in the way of study, and we'll work with that through the COG.
Yeah, because I think it's interconnected, and the concern I have, if you don't include that, then they'll say, well, you know what, we'll have to have our own study, and that, instead of hitchhiking onto it, and then that pushes the solution to Whaley Avenue further out. If there is a solution, I don't know.
And I don't know that either, but we'll look at it. I mean, it's been difficult to get these studies going with the state because they did not have any money. And you know, now, as I say, that there is some money available, and especially through the Safety Lou bill, the federal bill, that is very cognizant of safety improvements. And that's really what we're looking at here, because there are a lot of accidents in this particular area.
Nor do we want to make it so complicated, Judy, that all of a sudden we get, well, you know, you had so much money for this, but that's not enough for that, and therefore we'll and then you get into a stall tactic, and that's another consideration that you want to try to.
One of the things that the mayors will be, and first selectmen will be voting on next month will be the new work plan for our organization from June 30th to next July 1st. And part of that is going to be studying all of the Wilbur Cross entrance and exit ramps from Milford all the way to Meriden. And we'll be advising, our study that will be done by a consultant will be advising the state on how they can make safety and operational improvements to all of those entrance and exit ramps along that. So this will be included in that. We don't want to duplicate what this study's doing, so we'll be coordinating with them on it.
Is there part of this, again, I throw this out just because it is a factor, that we have flooding on West River there. And that unusual, you know, when we have unusually heavy rains, that can shut down Whaley Avenue. And that, again, complicates the commuting and the flow of traffic. Is that any part of, and also back near the exit and entrance to 15. Is that?
That would have to be part of the scope, because our original study showed the flooding in the West River and the concerns we had along
Good.
there. And I think that, again, they're going to incorporate that initial study as part of the scope for the
That's reassuring, because people in that area are very sensitive to the array of problems that flow, pardon the pun there, from, an overflow of West River. Good.
And we do recognize also that the town is doing Merritt Avenue Bridge, is it?
We'll be installing a new Merritt Avenue Bridge in the next 2 years.
Right.
That's good.
And while we didn't get funding under the President's budget for the Corps of Engineers to do a feasibility study on West River, Congressman DeLauro has put in a bill for an appropriation of $100,000 to that effect. And we're going to have the support of both of our
Terrific.
U.S. senators for that. So hopefully we'll be able to do something.
Good.
And along those lines, we're meeting with representatives of the New Haven Land Trust in June, who own the Pond Lily Dam. And some of the studies that we had done 20 years ago suggested that the removal of that dam would have a significant impact on reducing flooding in that area. And initially, they seemed to be receptive to that idea, but we'll see where that takes us.
But all of that will be coordinated.
Professor Plattus?
Yeah, if I can barge in, Judy, I don't know if you're going to be able to stay for my presentation, but I'll give you a quick preview. We are absolutely convinced, based on the work that we've done so far, that circulation in the area that we're looking at, which is precisely the area we're talking about, is one of the keys, if not the key, to improving its functionality. And of course, the intersection is smack in the middle of all of it. And we're discovering some possibilities as we start to work with the structure of the area that I think this is all very timely and fortuitous, and it may well be that you can get belt and suspenders out of this, that if DOT is funding a study and if the scope of the study is appropriately defined, that you may have some significant support from the state to look at precisely the kinds of things we're going to suggest you look at to make that area work better.
So that could be instrumental in that you'll be ahead of the curve, because you'll have some specific ideas on how to affect the scope of the study. Make sure it didn't.
We hope we will, and we would be. I mean, we would be thrilled to collaborate on it, because it means that certain kinds of things, if we all agree that they're appropriate to study, could move ahead that much faster. The other thing that's worth mentioning is that we have some experience, mostly good experience, piggybacking on traffic studies. We recently did that in Branford Center with the area around the town green, as a consultant was retained, in this case by the town, to do a town-wide traffic and parking study.
Good. Not having a lot of experience in going through this process before, but can one assume if we have a concrete plan that the state would be more apt to do something involved in the study and actually executing on it because we have a plan and there's something with intent to do it?
The state would be cooperative if that plan fits in with the state standards and with what the state requires. But Alan's very familiar with that. He knows, right. So that I'm sure it'll be in sync with that. So
we'd certainly encourage.
Yeah, and it's fortunate we've put we set into motion several different things that complement each other. They can have value with each other.
Right. Good.
And I think your state legislators have heard a lot from your constituency here in this region, New Haven, Woodbridge, and Bethany, that something needs to be done. So it has kind of reached the top as far as a number of complaints, accidents, the need for safety improvements, and traffic flow. So, and economic development. I mean, that's another key.
That's great. Good. So if it's 18 to 24 months for conceptual design, move us through the other couple of phases, so hopefully we'll be around at the turn of the millennium to see this project completed.
Well, I don't want to give you any hope that there would be construction in the street within 36 months, but I would certainly say that within the next 5 years of the study, usually when we work with the state on our projects, it's within 5 years of when they complete studies that you see the project completed. that didn't happen. I'll take my hometown of Branford with the railroad bridge over Route 1. It's still there. I was in office in '85 when we got interested in doing that, and it's still not built. So but there was a reason for that. Amtrak held us up, and Amtrak has held us hostage, actually.
And with
So
this,
there
you
are
have a state
circumstances,
highway.
without complications and and with cooperation and coordination of other things, it moves more quickly.
But I think we need to do that for those who are listening, and that they don't have a false sense of impression that this is going to be done in a couple of years. It's not going to happen. Okay.
No, so if you're talking 24 months, 24 months for a study, and then, maybe 3 to 5 years beyond that.
Sure. Okay. That's helpful.
I have one more piece of information, and I'll leave these copies with you of the report. This is our regional land use plan, our state plan of conservation and development, actually, and there's an email about this. But Emmeline, our land use planner, asked me to bring by copies with you because we've discussed this actually today, First Selectman Sheehy, at our meeting of the COG, that these state land use maps are not in sync with what's really on the ground in your communities. And we really believe that the towns need to take special note of that and start looking at your regional maps and where you find them in conflict with what you have on the ground. We would like to learn of that, so that when we put our regional plan together, which we're now completing in the next couple of months, we can make those corrections on our regional plan and our regional maps. And then when we send them to the state, we can say, we're in conflict with you, or we're not in sync with you, and here's why. And we can help the municipalities to make sure that their land is actually designated on the state Plan of Conservation and Development map accurately. And the reason this is significant, as was mentioned today by Mayor Dickinson in Wallingford, the state DEP is now considering that you cannot receive expansion money for sewers or public water through the state funds if you are in, for example, a preservation area and expanding. That doesn't mean you can't develop that area, but you can't use state funds to do it, is what they're saying, in any way, shape, or form. That could affect things that happen in your community. So as you're talking economic development and thinking about it, you want to be sure that you are building along the lines of where either you're in sync with this and with the state plan, or where you need changes, that you seek those changes so that we can make sure that you can go forward if you want to with some state funding or expansion of services.
And we can change the map if it's an error,
well,
a little bit of time ahead of time.
That's the real problem. It takes almost a miracle to change the map. So to start on it early is extremely important, and to have good detail of why and what was there and documenting is also important. So we'll help with that. Emmeline in our office can help each town to make sure that if your map is incorrect and you need to have some changes made. Yeah.
Are you reviewing that?
We're aware of this inconsistency, and we have resources that can assist you in your task.
Great.
When the town plan, or when the state plan of conservation and development was last updated, we forwarded to them the areas that we knew were not correct. They had identified, in particular, in the southwest corner of the state, that there was an industrial area, which is a residential area, and we asked that that be taken out of that area and be shown as a residential area, what it should be shown as.
Do you see any grade, inconsistencies as you take a look at that document or that drawing?
We think that there's some work to be done, and we have mapping resources, and we have a number of things that we could that Judy's organization could help us a good deal in.
Could the inconsistencies, or whatever you want to call it, interfere with the state funding highway improvement, because that whole area is laced with water and sewer?
No, this is going to be a state project, and so that funding and that project is for safety purposes. I don't believe it would interfere, especially since I don't believe it's in the designated as the preservation. But North Branford Town Hall, for example, you might be familiar with LoCIP funding, which is the local capital improvement funding. They can't use LoCIP funding to fund any addition to their town hall because the state map shows it in a preservation area. I mean, it's not. It's been there. It was built, you know. But that's the kind of thing that we need to correct. And I've had reassurances from the Commissioner of DEP, Gina McCarthy, as recently as yesterday, that that map has to be redone. That OPM, when they did the map, it's not what's really out there. It's based on what soils are out there, but it's not based on what's actually in the ground.
Terry?
I believe that our inconsistency actually goes the other direction. This map identifies industrial areas where we actually have residential areas. And so I don't think that it's constraining in that way, but there's no reason not to have it correct.
That's what our point is exactly.
Is there a timeline for this response, Judy, or is it?
Response for the mapping is I believe the end of April. We have our public hearing on May 8th on it for the regional plan, so it would be good if by the end of April.
Is that doable, Terry?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great.
We're going back many years, not that many years. When I was in office, we did an improvement along Lucy Avenue for sewer, because we found we had seepage. I mean, we could resolve some of the numbers, and that pipe was suspected as being the cause of the problem. And my point is, if we find that the lines are old or may need to be repaired, are there economies of scales that can be looked at when you have the heavy equipment you're dealing with the road? You might want to put in new pipe in the water or the sewer area.
I think all those things can be an add-on by the municipality at municipal expense or via another grant. Sometimes there are you can use more than one type of funding to solve a problem with these projects.
So we probably would have an incentive to take a look at that issue, because if there were something and they're going to have the roads dug up in 3 years, or at least have the heavy equipment there to do that, then maybe there's some economies there.
I think originally we talked about some new drainage anyhow in that area, in that particular area for those roadways. Well, it's
with the flooding, I think you did mention that.
Okay.
Right.
Good. Anything else that you have that's been very helpful?
No, I'll leave this information, and you can have a copy of it. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me.
Garrett or anyone here that has any other questions for Judy? Well, thank you for coming to our little neck of the woods here.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here again. It's nice to see you too again.
Great,
today.
twice in one day.
There you go. Next on the agenda, we're going to take a quick look at, because I wanted the commission to focus in on what is probably going to move forward regarding the Woodbridge Estates, which is senior housing units that are going up on Bradley Road, as well as the corner of Bradley and Litchfield Turnpike. And Terry and Chris are here just to comment on the Architectural Review Board, what their mission is, and then we'll try to move through this fairly quickly to not take too much of your time. So if you want to stay to your part of what Professor Plattus was going to present to us today, we're not going to take too much of yours either. But the good news is you won't have commuting traffic back to Branford over the bridge.
Roger has a big game plan.
That's right, that's right. Economies of scale, it's called. Let's not waste gas. Chris?
What we had done the last time we were here, we met with you back in February. I believe I had given you some plans, and what I was requested to do was again give you some detailed sheets for, in particular, what the lighting was going to look like down in the proposed Woodbridge Village District. So this is for your use. It's the detail sheet that they have showing what type of lighting that they would be using. This is one of the components that the Architectural Review Board reviews.
They agreed to? They like that? They signed off on that?
They've reviewed this and they didn't have any adverse comment on it. Part of the plan that they reviewed is a photometric plan, so what they're looking at is not lighting the night sky, but also, making sure that there's security for people who are walking either the sidewalk areas or just utilizing the area. So that the type of lighting that's here, if you review the detail on it, shows that it's cut-off lighting. It's not going up, it's going down. It's being directed into the areas that need to be lit, so that there will be safety components to it in terms of people actually walking around the area, but it won't be projecting up to lighten the sky above, so to speak. We have to make, that happy medium in there. We need people to be safe, but we don't want to pollute the sky any more than we can. The other detail that we had that I think you were looking at was the where the sidewalks would go. And I'm leaving with you a copy. This is their latest plan that they've given us. And what it does on the sheets that I've put the sticky notes on for you is this is the actual site plan layout as you were looking down at in terms of giving you both landscaping where trees would be planted, where lights would be installed, and it also gives you the sidewalk layout. And what this is showing is that they're going to have sidewalks going down both sides of Bradley and also down both sides of Litchfield, and then going up to the individual.
When you say both sides of Litchfield?
Well, both
So
sides of
left and
Litchfield
right.
where this development is. It's not going to offer to do anything on the other side of the road, but where the development would be, they're proposing to put in a sidewalk system wherever they are along Bradley, wherever they are along Litchfield Turnpike.
And that's part of an overall plan to build sidewalks so we ease the flow of pedestrian traffic, so we don't have to get in our car and go 2 blocks here and 3 blocks there, or the residents don't have to use a car to get to some portion.
That's
So
right.
ultimately, we'll want to build out a greater network of, again, depending upon what we see as a way to facilitate economic development. We want to get some input on the value of sidewalks, not only from a safety point of view, but from a flow point of view to cut down cars on the road, things like that.
Well, and in the Town Plan and Zoning Commission, in their town plan, has identified that this area, they want to have a sidewalk scape. And as a base of that, they want it to go down Bradley on Litchfield Turnpike on the westerly side, along Lucy Street on the northerly side, and then on the easterly side of Amity Road as a base, because that would give you a good block for people, at least, because there's so many communities there in the area, and it would allow the people who live there to have more of a sense of community and be able to walk safely to any of the businesses which are in that area, as well as the commercial area which is proposed within this
So
development.
the intent here is to try to meld what we do with what town planning and zoning is doing and be aware of what they're doing, so we're all pulling in the same direction and we're not going off on one tangent while they're going off on the other. Ed mentioned to me, and maybe you could elaborate a little bit more about how we may want to improve the entrance into the Amity, where the bowling alley is and that strip shopping center, and maybe this might be a time to just say what people were looking to, or the tenants there might have suggested to you.
Well, I think that Alan had mentioned earlier that maybe we should have some kind of a designation that you're now entering Woodbridge in effect by having some kind of a design changing from the New Haven town line. I don't know whether you're going to address that.
A little bit, yeah.
So some kind of characteristic of you're now into Woodbridge or some statement through lighting or whatever, shrubbery or what have you.
We've also found that down in that area, as you are probably well aware, there's always a lot of signs going up that don't conform with our sign regulations the way they exist. But it doesn't also support the fact that there are many businesses that are back in there. I mean, if you go back, even I came here in 2000. In 2000, if you went back into the Sheldon Plaza area, you found many empty parking spaces. And when you go back there now, they're filled up, fortunately, because there are thriving businesses that are back in there. But you want to help support those so that we've, planning and zoning and as staff, we've also talked about the idea of possibly having some kind of thing to identify that there are businesses back in there, because otherwise when you're just driving up and down Amity Road, you really don't know that there's a whole nother little village center that's in there and what's back in there. And there are certainly all sorts of services now that are back there, and restaurants and whatnot that are there that could be supported by some kind of welcome, or at least letting people know that they're there, as well as alleviating all the little signs that get tacked up onto the phone posts and everything else.
Chris, can I get back to the sidewalk sign?
Sure.
I know, so you're having developers, when they come in, put in the sidewalks in those areas. But for those existing businesses, how will sidewalks be linked? Will the town come in and add them, so that we get the whole square? How does that happen?
We would like to respectfully suggest that you might assist the town, and this commission assist the town in making that point of view, because I think that we could easily as projects become developed, make the requirement, and we've already started this, by the way, before any requirement was when a recent bank went in.
I hear Terry.
We got a sidewalk.
Excuse me for interrupting, Terry, but is that picked up, or should Terry come closer to the microphone?
I think he'll be fine.
Okay, sorry to interrupt.
So when the New Alliance Bank started, we, renovating the former vitamin shop that was there, perhaps one of the more focused moves that was made a few years ago, dramatic changes in that parcel of land, the first in many, many years, and the Town Planning and Zoning Commission required sidewalks on 3 sides of it, without there being any rule or regulation for it, and the developer accomplished that, and as properties have come in for development permits, we've gotten these sorts of things without question. I mean, we tell them to do it, they do it, and we will have a chore, however, I believe, is to fill in the blanks,
Right.
where there's no work being done, where something probably should be done.
And consistent with what you just said, we need to have, a good understanding, and certainly Professor Plattus will give us some direction from our, mission. Our mission is to improve the economic development and the growth and the value of that land, so we get more businesses, we get businesses that will yield more taxes to us in an environmentally friendly manner. And that's where Professor Plattus will help us. So we're really trying to complement what Town Planning and Zoning and this Architect Review Board has said, maybe add some thoughts to their plans or their thinking that hadn't been considered as we listen to Professor Plattus. And then if we know what the plan is that we all seem to like, then we have to chase how it's going to be implemented. The money, the grants, the way to pay for it. So the first thing is that we all have to be on the same page with the plan, and then we can figure out how it's going to be implemented. Is that sort of where you're heading, I hope?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, it's great because we think of those things naturally, particularly in an area where the development patterns for so long have been largely auto-oriented and suburban. It's one of the first things that strikes us, so it's good to know that other people are paying attention to that already.
Do you think it would be helpful, Terry, and Chris, you're familiar with Town Planning and Zoning. Do they have I haven't spoken to Don on this, do they have a good understanding of what we're trying to do so that they don't hear rumors to the effect that, did you hear what the Industrial and Development Board or Commission is doing? Do you think, or when do you think it might be, if it's necessary at all, to go to them and sort of give to their committee a mini presentation of what we're trying to do so they understand that we are trying to work consistent with what they have done? And we're not pulling in they're trying to go in a different direction.
Certainly they would be delighted to hear from you. They meet at least once a month, sometimes most months twice a month, and they make a concerted effort to address these issues, and I'd be delighted to hear from you.
Well, I think when Professor Plattus, we'll hear his presentation tonight, and then at some point he's going to talk to the Board of Selectmen about this, and I think we can coordinate a meeting with the Town Planning and Zoning Commission doing the same thing.
I just want to make it crystal clear to them that we're not going off on our own little tangent here. We're aware of what they have done. We're aware of some of the plans that are in place that they've reviewed, and we're trying to mesh that together with what we're trying to do and what Professor Plattus is going to recommend. So Professor Plattus obviously going to take into this account, but I wanted to, again, reach out to them just so that they had no misunderstanding that we're working in conjunction, in concert with them, not in odds with them.
We were assuming that at some point when you all directed us to do this, that we would make an informal preliminary presentation of some kind to Planning and Zoning, and I think they deserve to be on the same page as much as possible.
And again, we can have a very simple you know, I could meet with Donnie or whatever they may want to do, just to let us know where we're going, not to make a big deal of it.
We can
and then
invite
to say,
them to the presentation that Professor Plattus will
That's
make
a
to the
good
Board of
idea.
Selectmen, so that he doesn't have
That's
to
a
do
good
it
idea.
twice. And
Whatever.
let me
Okay.
just ask about this application of the Woodbridge Estates. I understand it's
Sure.
in the public hearing process now.
There was a hearing that was begun on part of it last month. The only part that actually requires a hearing is a separate but coincidental application for earth removal, fill, and regrading. But that hearing started last month. It was continued until this coming month. They've already given us an extension of time so that we're understanding that this will probably continue on until at least May. We've been requesting that other input be given. We know that now the fire department is meeting with them or met with them last night, so that we're hopeful that that input will be coming back. Because as you can imagine, there's whole bunches of components that have to be reviewed in here. And so it is in the public hearing process. The next regular meeting of the commission will be on April 7th. It's a public meeting. Everybody's welcome to come. At the last meeting, Poole was there, and to the best of my knowledge was recorded and was broadcast. So you're welcome to come or watch it on TV.
Chris, did they, have you reviewed the traffic study? Has the state?
The state doesn't always want to comment on it before the local planning and zoning commission has acted. That's our understanding, because they don't want to have to be acting on something that may get changed by the local agency. So it's our understanding that what they will normally do is hold their final approval until the local agencies have acted, although they have been in review of this, so that there have been changes that are being worked on both 69 and how Bradley Road would come down. What they've wanted them to do is to realign Bradley Road so that it will line up with where Bradley Road is on the east side of Route 69, because currently there's a little bit of a jog there. They've asked them to make turn lanes and whatnot. So the plans are all reflective of that, and they are still having an ongoing dialogue with the state, because we get copies of the communications that are going on back and forth with them on that.
Good. Does the plan that you're going to leave behind include the new setback, or does that?
This plan is representative of the changes that they made based to input that they received from the Town Planning and Zoning Commission. What it's showing is that the setbacks are 50 feet from Litchfield Turnpike and Bradley Road. The required setbacks in this district are 75 feet. So it's still not exactly where everything else is if you go up Bradley Road.
But it's better than the 25 that they had originally.
It's obviously not as close as the 25. These plans also reflect changes that were made because of Architectural Review Board input. In particular, the townhouses which are at the back, the back of which would be the backyards of Landon Street. When the Architectural Review Board was reviewing it, they were concerned that as those people looked out from their houses, they were going to be looking at a roofscape and a set of buildings which had no break in how they looked. And so they've redesigned the look of that. They've broken up the roofscape so that the roofs will vary in height. There will be different window placements and whatnot, so that what the people who live along Landon will look out at is not one solid block of the same thing. And so they've changed that. They've also diminished some of the units that were there. Originally, this proposal came in with 137 units. The original proposal had been 147. It's my understanding that now we've reduced it with another 3 units, because what they've done is they've changed the configuration to internally create some more green space too. They've created more green space in the yards between Landon and where these townhouses would be, as well as the front yards internally within it, so that there's more space as you're living in it. And as you're driving around it, there are more islands with trees and whatnot in it, because they're trying to make sure that it's got a greenscape to it. So these plans are reflective of comments that they had received from the Architectural Review Board. And so as you go through it, there's more detailed sheets on here. It actually will give you color renderings of what the facades of the buildings, both front and rear, would look like. The important thing that they like to note for the people who live along Litchfield Turnpike is that the units that face towards Litchfield Turnpike would, in a sense, look like houses if you're looking across the road from them, so that on the northerly parcel, the units that would be facing out, while you would have a block of housing units, the end unit that faces Litchfield Turnpike would, in a sense, have its front face to Litchfield Turnpike. So as you drove down Litchfield, you would be looking at the front of a structure, even though it would be a line of housing that would be there. And those renderings are in here, and you can look at those.
Good.
So those are things that, you know, the Architectural Review Board has looked at.
This is helpful. Again, if it's a little bit redundant, I think it's important that we focus in on this, just so that we better understand the Architectural Review Board, how it's an adjunct to what town planning and zoning has done, and how we're all trying to understand what they have set in motion as it affects what we're trying to accomplish to make the district more attractive for economic development.
They, in effect, will also be meeting next Tuesday night to review the revised plans, because they gave their initial report to the Town Planning and Zoning Commission before these revised plans were done. So they're going to be re-reviewing them and then issuing some more comments back to Planning and Zoning for their April 7th meeting to presumably say that whether everything that their concerns were had been addressed by these revised plans. So they'll be meeting yet again next week.
Thank you for, any other questions? Thank you.
And that April 7th meeting, Paul, that will be televised as well?
I have to find a cameraman because it coincides with the Amity Board meeting,
Okay.
but I will make an effort.
That'd be good to do that, I think. Yeah. Good.
Again,
Okay.
that information?
I could also
This
mention
is
there are
yours. I'll open this
DVDs.
up for you.
we're going to leave that. If it's helpful,
Library.
we can create a folder upstairs that Jerry Shaw can immediately access, that will have our name on it, the commission's name, and we'll build up a file. And in that, if you want to look at it in more detail, it'll be available there. Thank you very
The
much.
staff were here during the day, so if you have any questions in particular, you can either email us or call us or stop by, and certainly we can go over the plans if you have any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
taking time. I know it's 6 o'clock and it's not your typical evening, even though you go to a lot of boards and commissions, so maybe it is more typical than your. But thank you again for coming down. Professor, you're next.
Okay, I've got a PowerPoint presentation, so you may want to shift to the other side and we'll dim the lights a little bit. That's, of course, assuming that all of this works. I understand. Okay, sounds good.
I wanted to mention there are also DVDs of the meetings, both planning and zoning and your commission at the library.
Oh,
So
that's a good point. That there are DVDs, you said, for both this taping, this meeting and others, as well as town planning and zoning, over at the library. The ones that you're right, and the Board of Selectmen. So anyone that wants to get a view of a particular meeting can go over there and see it.
And ask.
And
Well, they can ask.
do they take it out and take it home, or do they play it over there?
I'm not sure. I think they're allowed to take it out.
They're allowed to take it out. Very good. Thank you.
They can at least ask.
Good.
It's evidently got to warm up again. I put it on, not very good. Now, let's see, do these lights go right? People are going to be able to see it all.
Thanks, Chris.
We'll have to do the meetings in the future after dark.
Daylight savings.
We actually have put together a fairly meaty presentation, which we may decide, in fact, I'm almost sure we will decide, we want to go back to again. We can treat this as a little bit more of a preview. And I'll go through these things, and I'm happy to field questions, but I think you're going to find that there's a lot to chew on here, because what's happened is we really dove into this over the last month or so. We have an extremely good graduate student, very experienced with this scale of project, working on it right now. And also, we've run ahead of ourselves a little bit. What I think I had said at the last meeting is that after a little bit of a logistical meeting last time, we would come back with some preliminary observations about the way in which the district was working or not working. And indeed, we have those. But in doing that, we have made a couple of discoveries that have inspired us to move ahead with some specific proposals. Not very detailed proposals, but I think some pretty interesting ones, which may in the long run accelerate the process. In other words, by laying these out there and getting your response, which may well be negative or partly negative, which is fine at this stage. I think we're going to move along a little bit quicker.
When would that be, a time frame?
Well, we're going to start right now, and we'll see. I'm happy to come back at the next meeting, but it might well be that we want to schedule some kind of work session where there's nothing else on the agenda, and we can just sit around and roll up our sleeves, and that could either be the whole commission, or you might designate a subgroup to meet with us and for a more of a hands-on working session where we really get out the pens and mark stuff up and respond. But let's see how that goes. This I think you saw last time in printed form. This is a reasonably up-to-date aerial photograph that we've assembled from online information of the core of the district. The street at the top is Bradley Road. I probably ought to get out my lightsaber here and so I can point at things without getting in the way. Up here, and that's obviously the Route 15 intersection, the Amity Shopping Center, the small plaza. So everybody oriented pretty much. It's actually quite a useful tool when you look at it, because it gives you a very quick view, a little bit better than a straightforward plan. And we'll get to these points in a little bit more detail, but I think that in the light of the discussion that you all have been having so far this evening, I just want to reiterate that this area is not working like a conventional town center, even though it is attempting to perform some of the commercial functions that one would normally associate with a town center, partly because it's largely been the product of infrastructure decisions which have as their primary and legitimate goal moving traffic through the area, as opposed to facilitating what I think your planner referred to earlier as a sense of place, local sense of place, with all that implies, and also the operation of local businesses, which are partly dependent, certainly on regional traffic, but are also partly dependent on a kind of local quality of life that would make them competitive with similar scales of retail elsewhere in the region. And there are also some opportunities. So we'll go through that. Let me just show some pictures that we've been looking at. They'll be familiar to all of you. This is looking back at the traffic intersection. This is, in effect, for many, many people, the entrance to Woodbridge. Obviously, this is Litchfield Turnpike. There's Amity Road on the other side, but this is where the traffic comes off the highway on Route 15 at this point.
Did you edit out all the cars?
I didn't take that one. I'm not sure when my student was out there shooting it, but
it must be a Sunday.
Quite apart from the cars, you see that you're greeted by the gasoline station and a lot of asphalt and not much landscape, and generally speaking, a kind of nondescript streetscape that could be, for all practical purposes, just about anywhere. There is this little piece of sidewalk, by the way, which is not, but it doesn't go anywhere at the present time.
That's what our sidewalks do.
In any case, I think that this is clearly an area that we're going to concern. But just a few blocks away, you get this kind of environment, which is at least as we took the picture, and of course we did this tendentiously, really a pretty nice quality sort of neighborhood feel, where one's expectation is that this is in fact a pedestrian environment. So there are fragments. This is what's interesting about the area. There are fragments of different kinds of environments that don't necessarily hook up very well. You get a little bit of one kind of thing, a little bit of another kind of thing, a lot of parking lot, a lot of strip style development, but then episodes like this. And of course for the people who live here, that's their street. And that's, that is, I think, something to aspire to. You also get, when you're not worried about the flooding and other things that are going on, some really nice little glimpses, even without leaves on the trees, of the natural environment, which could be enhanced over time to become not perhaps so much a threat to the area, but an asset to the area as well. This could be, with a little bit of touch-up work, a kind of New England scene, interestingly enough, if people were given better access to it. But then you have the kinds of conflicts that people have talked about, a regional arterial with very little relationship to what's on either side of it, but immediately onto the regional arterial, a whole series of driveways that, at least on one side of the street, of course there are no sidewalks on either side of the street. So there are mixed messages being sent here. And I've noticed in looking, and we've looked very carefully, we've actually drawn the latest site plan of the proposed new development into our computer model so that we can look at the way in which it works, or in some cases doesn't work, with the area. What's interesting, of course, is it is for all practical purposes created as a cul-de-sac. It has no outlets on, other than Bradley Road, onto Litchfield Turnpike, probably in order to control traffic and access and that sort of thing. On the other hand, you have a whole row of two-family houses over here that have driveways that just, without any to-do, just back right out into the to the road. So the issue of access and being consistent about that is an issue. And here, of course, very successful.
Professor, can I just ask you, what do you think about the scale? I mean, if you put that last shot, if you put the development, which would be right across the street from this one, with the sidewalks and all, what's your sense about, will it overwhelm the street?
In fact,
will it complement?
If the development is designed as, is built as designed,
And it should.
it will set a higher standard than this stuff sets right now, by a long shot. I mean, yes, it'll be bigger, but not to the extent that it'll have I don't think you're going to have any problems of scale on that street.
Right.
As I say, I think what it will do is it'll set a slightly higher design standard for the area in a number of respects, which is not so bad, right? Whether it's streetscape or architecture or planning for that matter. So we can talk more about that. We've spent a lot of time looking at it now. This shot, I think, describes some of the issues that you have in the area. Here's what is, at the moment, a fairly thriving attraction for people in the area, but it might as well be a drive-in restaurant because it has no pedestrian connection to anything, right? Across the parking lot, across the driveways, it's thought of as a totally auto-oriented use in that respect. It might as well be a rest area on the side of a highway. And so along with design standards that require new development to build sidewalks, which I think is an obvious idea, you also want those sidewalks to link to the front doors of business establishments so that people walking along the sidewalk feel like they're invited into the businesses without having to cross no man's land, namely the parking and circulation that's associated with it. So this is all fairly, we'll come back to this. And then of course you have, the good and the not so good, underperforming properties with enormous seas of fairly unattractive asphalt, which is unnecessary because much of the time, even at peak times, they're underutilized. you've got a lot of redundant parking in this area, which means a lot of excess asphalt, which is not at all uncharacteristic of suburban environments everywhere. People overbuild parking and they take the course of least resistance, minimum landscaping, minimum lighting, all of that. So, now, what we did bring along, well, there's another shot looking back to Amity Road, where there are some opportunities clearly where certain businesses, as was already mentioned, like the New Alliance Bank, present a fairly attractive aspect. And if you could think ahead to other businesses and new businesses coming up to the same standard, that area starts to have a little bit more definition to it. What we wanted to jump ahead to, just to get you thinking, and we will be glad to email these slides to the appropriate spot so that people can look at them at their leisure. That's easy enough to do. Is a few examples that we found or knew about that may set some discussion going about what the possibilities are. Now, needless to say, these are not perfect parallels. They're in a variety of different places, different climates. Some are roughly the same density that you might have in that area. Some are a little higher, a little lower, but take that into account. This, by the way, is a development that one of our staff worked on a few years ago in Virginia. It's a housing development that is roughly the same size and very similar layout, a little bit denser, to what you're about to get, or what's being proposed to you. And it gives you a sense here of the feel of a site now that is fully built out and defined. And by the way, I call your attention to the setbacks, which are minimal in a very similar suburban situation, because what they effectively do is define the street edge. The architecture is a little more Georgian in its character, a little less colonial or Victorian, but you can see the standard of sidewalks and front yard path. Just like the proposed development, this is mixed use. It's got residential over commercial, and then in the middle of the project residential with a lot of fairly high quality open space and landscaping, and then immediately across the street you're back in the suburbs with freestanding drive-in restaurants and that sort of thing. So there's this, I think, very attractive, substantial pocket of what looks more like a town center, and it becomes a catalyst in that kind of environment. You can look at it. This does a very good job. It puts the parking in the middle. It's got some surface parking. The garages open onto the alleyways. So all the surrounding streets have house frontages. This, by the way, also, as you can see, has garages and even accessory units in the back. So it's a little bit denser than what you're looking at. This is in Florida. In fact, it's fairly well-known, even notorious development. It's the Disney development of Celebration, and it's a small mixed-use town center that is not dissimilar in scale from what you're seeing or could see in your area. And one of the things that it does is, this is why we bring it along, it takes all the parking and sticks it in the backs of the buildings rather than in front yards, and it makes shared parking. So all of the retail around this block share this parking lot in the middle, similarly over here, plus there's also on-street parking, very appropriate for a town center. And that's something that these days people think of as best practices. It's not always possible or appropriate, and in fact there are alternatives, but this is a good example of using that. That's just a closer shot that shows you the quality of streetscape and then the parking lots in back. By the way, when you have parking lots like this in back, it gives you a chance to have rear entrances to stores, which are not so bad. If you think of Madison's Main Street and the way that it works, on one side is Main Street, Then in back there's the parking, a lot of rear entrances. In case of something like R.J. Julia, there's a bookstore in front, a little cafe that you enter from the parking lot in back. These kinds of things tend to work. Banks, if they have a front, instead of having a teller machine on the side, put the teller machine in back where it has access from the parking and circulation. This is another way to do it. This is front parking in Palos Verdes, California. This is an older development, beautiful older development that was laid out in the 30s. And this is, for all practical purposes, a strip-style center with front parking which is treated as a public plaza. And I'll show you a slide of it. This is, I brought this because it's very, believe it or not, it's very similar in scale to your little plaza, with the bowling alley at one end and the bike shop at the other. It's just that in this case, it's all lined with arcades behind which the shops exist. There's a big parking lot and a fountain in the middle of the parking lot. It seems a little bit implausible, but just the presence of that fountain turns this into a public space. You could do it with a flagpole, you could do it with planting, you could do it with any number of things. The arcades, of course, help as well, but something that is fundamentally an auto-oriented strip center is turned into a significant and very attractive and very successful piece of commercial development. Then a couple of slides just to remind ourselves that mixed use is always good in these areas wherever possible. Getting apartments above stores gives potential developers an opportunity to leverage their investment. Mixed use is good economic development policy because when there's a downturn in one part of the market, it doesn't completely kill off the development. So you may have a vacant store, but the residential may be occupied. Alternately, you may have something going on in the store and the residential may not be rented at the moment, but at least there's a chance to balance that out and take advantage of that. This is Blueback Square, which is a little bit on the extravagant side, but it's the one everybody around here thinks of right now, with lots of town-like stuff going on.
West Hartford, right?
It's West Hartford, yeah. So you drive your car there, but you get out of your car and then you use the various facilities on foot. This is Baldwin Park, Florida, where again there is a kind of new Main Street created, and I want you to keep that in mind. The perimeter is filled up with residential. There's landscape parking in the middle of the block, and then there is this new Main Street that's inserted to create commercial opportunity that takes advantage of the mixed use all around and creates a pedestrian environment. There's what it looks like. It's relatively low scale. Most of it's two-story. Some of the residential's 2.5-story. But you can see it's not downtown New York, but it functions in some ways according to the same principles. Lots of people on the street, on-street parking for short-term use, mid-block parking for longer-term use. And then one of my favorites, which I just threw in, this is an older one as well from the 1920s. This is Country Club Plaza in Kansas City, which was all done by a developer in a developing area of Kansas City with, again, a new street, a kind of signature street, Alameda Street, which is in the midst of a large block cut through to make a distinctive shopping street and commercial environment, and the kind of fanciful architecture doesn't hurt. Looks like it's from Southern California, but it's actually in Kansas City. And among planners and urban designers, this is a very famous and still very, very successful example. There are other examples like this that I could show you from Lake Forest, Chicago, or from Shaker Heights, Cleveland. All of them basically suburban locations vis-a-vis center city. So just like Woodbridge vis-a-vis downtown New Haven. So they're sub-centers, but they create a kind of village-like environment, even though that village may only be a block or two long. And as a result, they become very attractive. And then one final one, this one is from Shaker Heights actually, but it's a newer development where again a large block which had strip-style retail in it, in the middle of it with lots of parking around it, has a new street cut right through the strip center to make opportunities for new mixed-use development. So the corner sites now, which didn't exist before, are ground floor retail with loft condominiums up above. There are new townhouses dropped in. So taking something that was a fundamentally suburban superblock where circulation was through parking areas and turning it into a street system that has a kind of downtown character to it. Now, this brings us, there are some pictures of, again, the quality of streetscape doesn't hurt, to the idea that sort of emerged as we were thinking about what the issues are. One of the issues for us is that the arterial streets, 63 and 69, that define this area are being asked to do double duty as very busy regional corridors and as the local access for just about everything that goes on in the area. You've got very big blocks. The interior streets are for the most part not through streets. Many of them, in fact, are dead-end streets. And there's absolutely no redundancy in the system. And so circulation around that area, as we know when we drove around together the other day, you find yourself doing this. So that, you know, you start out here, but to get over there, instead of just being able to go up to the corner and turn left, you end up going all the way around a very big block. That's particularly obvious when you get off the highway. If you get off that highway and you're headed to Amity Road, you have to make a big loop around to get back over to any of the businesses or any of the things that are going on in the rest of the area. So what we were looking for opportunities to think about creating a little bit more of a street grid and a little bit more redundancy in the system, because traffic moves better when it distributes. This is just a fact. That when you have multiple possibilities from getting from point A to point B, you don't get nearly as much congestion, and you get a kind of natural traffic calming as people move through the area. So we actually started to diagram that. This may not mean a whole heck of a lot to you. That's Route 15. This is over the aerial photograph. And the light blue are the arterial streets, and there's Bradley Road, which is a major connector. And what we're looking for is a way to get the red stuff to function as a local street system independently, for the most part, of these major arterials, so that you can get off of those arterials and distribute to residential properties and commercial properties within a kind of village-like center over time. Now, we're going to show you one way that we came up with to do that, just as an example. And it may be something that people have thought of before, because these things, when you discover them, you know, they look so obvious to you that you think, gee, somebody must have thought of that. And that's this middle red street, which actually doesn't exist. But it performs the function of connecting all of these long cross streets and creating smaller blocks, which is, generally speaking, good urban design when you're trying to make a lively environment, and giving you more ways of getting around and connecting. And I think this starts to illustrate that. Now, that green is in fact the central green in the new proposed project. So that area, this is Bradley Road, that area is the project that's been proposed, and that is their central green. And what we're suggesting could happen based on their cue is to make a new main street, a brand new main street that allows you to come off the highway. You can go left or right to either Litchfield or Amity, or you can move down that main street and it links a kind of boulevard space in this drawing with the green, or you turn left and you come over to the plaza and its little cul-de-sac street, and there could be something more plaza-like there rather than just a parking lot. But this is the kind of thing that we thought we would come. We thought if we were lucky, we would begin to find things like this in a couple of months after we'd been through a lot more. But I think they're starting to come up now, and so we jumped ahead and stuck our necks out There it is a little bit more clearly.
But how do you effectuate something like this? Isn't that all privately owned property?
No.
And then it's
Well, it is all privately owned property, but a lot of it is just parking lot. So effectuating it, all or part of it, would be a process of consensus building that the property owners would agree that it makes everybody's
So then walk
site more
through
valuable.
That street goes through which properties?
Well,
Because
in particular, it goes between the existing strip centers here and the automobile dealership here. That's the big first move. But you could
come right out to the connector?
It goes, well, that could be, you could take that exit and instead of making it a loop, one-way loop, leading to the Litchfield Turnpike, you could bring it to an intersection, which is a point of arrival, and you could take it in both directions down the street, depending on where you want to go, or you could go straight ahead. But the details of it at this point are really neither here nor there. The principle that's being illustrated is the idea that you modify the circulation system to do several things. One is to make circulation work better, to make the pedestrian environment better, but also to create development opportunities, because what a street like that does is it creates a whole set of new front doors or potential front door commercial locations in what's now the middle of a block where it's just parking and dumpsters and other attractive uses. We could go back and look at the aerial photograph and see how that works. But if we could do that, let's say we can't do this. If we could do it, we think it's the kind of thing that would be desirable to do. There may be other ways of affecting the same thing, but the principle is to start to connect things rather than separate things.
Is there an impact on the Woodbridge Estates project?
Oh yeah, yeah.
He's moving that.
Yeah, this is a street that this piece of it right here, and this is partly what inspired it. Exists within the boundaries of their project. Right. It doesn't connect, at that point it dead ends right within 10 feet of the Litchfield Turnpike. It doesn't connect to the Litchfield Turnpike at the northern end, and it connects, and it stops in here. But if you extend it, this is what could be done with it, and it gives them a fair degree of connection and redundancy as well. I mean, it starts to get at this issue of, well, if you live there, wouldn't it be nice to be able to walk to Starbucks or to the plaza, to the restaurants, to that sort of thing, rather than feeling like the only way to do it is to get in your car, because the only access to their site plan right now is off of Bradley Road. So what you would do is you get in your car, go out to Amity Road or to Litchfield Turnpike to get any place else you want to be. Or you could try walking along Litchfield Road and Amity Turnpike.
Right, and that was the whole idea of connecting the sidewalks,
right?
Right? Of creating all around, to make that possible.
Yeah, which you should do, but
I still don't know how we're doing it. But
yeah.
Well, still looking to residential area, we're going right through resident.
There's the rest of the street system.
So there's, it's a curious concept.
You see, their street right now ends here and ends here. It's a complete cul-de-sac, basically, or it's two cul-de-sacs, one on each side of Bradley Road.
So behind them there are houses, and that would run through.
Runs right through the houses, right?
There are probably, as far as we can tell, there are, I believe, at most 2 houses that might be affected by this.
2 houses.
Yeah.
And then
but I'm not asking.
It's Crest.
But don't. I think if we focus on that now, we'll drive ourselves crazy. And that's why it's good that the people that live in those 2 houses, I hope, are not here right now. But we're and you can't identify them. We explicitly didn't show them at this point, because we're trying to illustrate principles, not a scheme that we're proposing you adopt.
Okay.
And the principle is to try to find ways of taking the good things that are happening in the area and connecting them up. And it may be possible in this way, or it may be possible in some other way. And that is the kind of thing that we're starting to look at. But certainly the southern part of, the northern part of it is going to be built by the developer if that development goes ahead. The southern part of it is mostly through land that's either DOT land or the interior of the parking lots from the automobile dealership and the shopping centers. And so it would, in fact, you could do it tomorrow and it would probably enhance their circulation rather than make it problematic in any way. That's it. As I said, we jumped ahead a little bit. What I should go back to is this diagram, because this is not a plan. This is really an idea about how the area could work better. By the way, that circle is a quarter-mile radius. And the significance of a quarter-mile radius for planners and urban designers is that in the best of all possible worlds, a quarter mile gives you about a 5 to 10 minute walk. And so it's a comfortable walking radius for most people in decent weather most of the time, if the environment allows it. So what it suggests is that this whole area could function as a comfortable pedestrian precinct once you get out of your car. And one of the ideas that we push when we're working with town centers is the concept of park once. What you want people to be able to do in a walkable commercial environment or mixed-use environment is to park their car once, get out of it, and do anything they want to do comfortably on foot before they get back in their car again. And I think you've got the possibility. I don't want to exaggerate it. I should do what Judy did and be judicious, because she was saying, well, don't expect this to happen tomorrow. You've got a lot of work to do before you get to a point where that's a comfortable pedestrian environment. It's an auto-oriented environment right now. And so let's not fool ourselves. It's about parking lots. It's about roads without continuous sidewalks. Even where the sidewalks are, they're very close to the road. And the traffic's moving rather quickly, so it's not a terribly comfortable pedestrian environment, except on those side streets like the ones that I showed you before, where suddenly you're very comfortable just for a moment. So if you decide that this is the kind of thing that will enhance the development environment, which I think it will, the good news is it's really doable. And in fact, without being a marathon distance runner, you could imagine a resident of the new development here taking a 15-minute walk or less to the Amity Plaza in New Haven, across the New Haven line. That's not a stretch, but nobody would do it now.
Professor, I could envision that rather easily, but they live there and they can park their car there.
Yeah.
We have a situation, we don't have public parking anywhere, to my knowledge, and we don't have on-street parking. So let's say, I own a store and I don't want a patron of mine to come shop, but then leave her car there and walk 10 minutes to shop somewhere else.
So you should want them to do that, because it works the other way too.
Well, that's a curious thought, but I don't know that I'm buying that.
That's how downtowns work. They absolutely work that way. And it's suburbs that work according to the principle of all of the parking that any business needs supplied on that lot, which means that for most of the day and most of the year, you end up building more parking places than you need most of the time, because there's no sense of shared parking whatsoever. This I can speak to fairly authoritatively. Towns, communities all over the country are going to shared parking. because it makes all kinds of economic sense and because it actually enhances the business environment.
How does that concept work?
The concept works that you look at the use mix that you have. And let's say you have a restaurant that has certain kinds of peak hours which are out of sync with the peak hours of the laundromat next door. And then you have residential, which needs parking mostly in the evening, not during prime business hours. And then you have a bookstore. You have a mix of stuff that has syncopated parking demands and peaks. And so when you have that kind of situation, if your ordinances allow it, you can reduce the required parking. Typically what you get in areas like that, the typical figure, and I'm not sure, you all should tell me what Woodbridge uses, I should know, but I don't. The typical figure with commercial parking is 5 cars per 1,000 square feet of
Ours is very close to
of
that.
commercial.
It's just 4, I think.
Sometimes it goes up much higher, but what people are pushing for now in these newer development is 3 to 3.5 cars per 1,000 square feet, which is perfectly doable, and it is actually quite conservative, because the theory is that the person who one day parks at your business because they're coming there first, but then decides they want to go eat lunch across the street, instead of getting in their car and driving across the street to park in another parking lot, leaves their car and goes across the street. But somebody who's eating lunch across the street and is parked over there decides the same way that after they're done with lunch, they're going to come and patronize a business on the other side of the street.
It sounds very logical to me, but my experience thus far with retail development is the retailers are telling us that people don't, walk, and that parking, that employees should park by the side so that patrons can come in and out. And it's even hard to get people to walk a small strip mall.
Well, we know people don't walk in this country. And we know there's a public health crisis. We know there's a public health crisis. Because of it, we also know that our overdependence on automobiles is producing other things.
Right.
So part of this is, I believe, good business sense, because small town centers and downtowns are coming back precisely because there are a lot of people now who find a pedestrian environment more friendly most of the time than a totally automobile-oriented environment. But it also makes a lot of environmental and public health sense, just coincidentally. And I know that's not the major goal of this particular group, but I can tell you that demographics are changing in this respect, and that a lot of areas that are becoming more competitive right now are becoming more competitive in the attempt to attract business because they are creating not only pedestrian-friendly environments, but bicycle-friendly environments as well.
I was going to, that was the question I had too, because with the green concept,
well,
one of the things is you have bicycle racks, but I really wonder, is there room on sidewalks for bikes and for pedestrians?
No, but if you made a new street, you should, in principle, design it looking forward with bike lanes, with sidewalks, with street trees, with all the things that create a standard for the environment. That's not going to work. Nobody who didn't absolutely have to would think of, it's hard enough to think of a pedestrian walking along Amity Road at rush hour with traffic zooming past. It would be suicidal for someone on a bicycle. So, as I'm sure Judy can tell you, I think people in the region are becoming more and more attuned to the fact that there is a large demographic out there that likes to be able to use their bicycles. We have a problem in New England in that we have an old infrastructure which is often very narrow, and I was just down in Florida. The irony is Florida, which is in some ways the most automobile-oriented environment on the face of the earth, has such wide right-of-ways that it's relatively easy to retrofit dedicated bicycle lanes. It's real tough to do that in a lot of our towns and roads. But there's going to be a demand for it. And in fact, we already have a huge problem in places that some of you, I'm sure, know about, where the bicycles are going ahead anyway, even though the street right-of-way doesn't really allow for it. But I think, let me put it this way, I think it's at the moment a bit of a stretch to think that we're going to make a kind of idealized bicycle environment in an area like this. Nobody, for instance, nobody from the rest of Wood, because of the topography, it's unlikely that people from the rest of Woodbridge, unless they're in really good shape, are going to want to ride their bicycles here.
The irony is, there are those people here.
Maybe they're horses. Yeah.
Professor, you brought up an interesting thing about you suddenly made that area with a little bit of lighting, and if that came through, you made it a lot safer. You got a higher feeling of safety, which might generate the traffic. And also, when you park your car once, that fits in with the $3 a gallon. Okay?
Yes.
I don't want to keep going from place to place to place at 3 something a gallon, or what could be 4 something a gallon in the next year. I can park once and hit 3 or 4 stores and psychologically save a half a gallon or a gallon. And I'm doing more walking. So that those two theories might come into place.
Yes, there are all kinds of things that come into play. And one theory, and it's only a theory at this point, is that if you do pedestrian-oriented development, that you make it possible for a family that moves there to do without maybe 1 car out of 3, or even 1 car out of 2, or the second car is an electric car, or even in some places now a golf cart. There are a lot of towns that are going to golf cart ordinances. I think we're probably a ways away from that in New England, but smart cars are now on the market here. And the disposable income that they save by not having to pay for and operate that extra car, or half car, or whatever, however you calculate it, goes back into their housing. They can pay for better housing, goes back into the local economy instead of down the gas tank. And I throw that out as a theory because I think while it makes sense, there's not real evidence yet that we've done enough to make that work.
I have a question for you. And I realize that you guys haven't begun to generate any kind of cost numbers or anything like that, but based on your experience, when you devised this simple plan, does this look like something that is a low-cost proposition with a high bang for the buck, or are you looking at saying, man, this is going to cost a fortune, but it's doable?
Depends on who you get to pay for it. I mean, one of the things that appealed to us about this is that, as I say, the whole northern section of this is going to be built anyway if the development goes ahead. Maybe we can get DOT to think about the reconstruction of the southern end of it as they consider ways of mitigating the congestion and traffic at that intersection. And then there's not that much left to do, and maybe we don't do it right away anyway, because there's private property to be considered in the mix. And it may be that you wait until opportunities come along, that this is a plan for 10 years. And you end up doing pieces of it initially, and the pieces that you do create the desire for the other pieces to be put into place. I think that's happened with projects like, say, the Farmington Canal Greenway in Hamden and New Haven and up through the state. Initially, there was a lot of skepticism about it, but then when the first pieces were realized, suddenly people looked at it and said, hey, that's great, we want to have our section of it as well. And you get a kind of knock-on effect with that. We're always of the opinion that you should try to get other people, private developers, other resources to pay for these kinds of things as much as you possibly can. Yeah.
I'm assuming, I apologize for walking late, that those pieces that the town would then have to deal with would have to be purchased. And how would you identify certain parcels that would need to be part of this plan, and then what is the mechanism that goes?
If and when something like this became a plan, and we're a long way from that, yes, what you would typically do is you'd look at those pieces and decide whether what you're negotiating are easements or purchases or takings or whatever would be the appropriate mechanism for doing that. I mean, I think one of you all opened my eyes the last time we had a discussion by saying, you know, maybe in 10, 15 years' time, that automobile dealership isn't there anymore. Well, that's a huge development opportunity. And if you had a system that was working like that and that parcel became available, and you had made these, even if you hadn't made the improvements, if you'd made the plans, the ability at that point to attract a quality development to that site would be, I think, enhanced considerably, especially if the parkway is seen as an asset rather than a liability. I think right now, probably, you know, it's a little bit of both. My instincts tell me if you've got a high volume road like that, it ought to be really good for local business. But I'm not sure you're getting much other than frustration out of it right now.
So this proposal really, in relation to what we know that the state is going to be doing over the next 2 years, is something for the DOT or whoever's doing the study to consider.
I think, you know, I would love the opportunity, but as I say, this is premature. And as I say, I was sticking my neck out, but I thought it would get get some discussion going. But certainly the part of it that has to do with reconfiguring the egress from the parkway, to put that on the table and to get the experts at DOT to consider what they think the options are, and to get an outside consultant with a lot of experience in these things to look at what they call the geometry of it. And, you know, given the volume, how many turn lanes do you need? Is it compatible with pedestrian access and all of those sorts of things? I think it's a huge opportunity. And there may be, you know, further discoveries. I will tell you this, that my experience right now is that there's a new generation of traffic planners coming along who are in some cases actually more aggressive in making pedestrian-friendly environments than us designers. And I've worked with a few of them over time who are absolute fanatics about traffic calming, about pedestrian-friendly intersections where you have bump outs and crosswalks, four-way stop signs as opposed to always traffic signals, all of those kinds of things. It's very, very interesting to see how far that is coming along. I think what happens a lot of times is that planning and zoning commissions are used to hearing the old line and have over time become very conservative about accommodating traffic before anything else, and they often get cold feet in these situations. So you really need to make a multi-level argument about why these kinds of improvements are good things, if you believe in them. And I really do. And I mean, I think the thing that has persuaded me, I have to say, I live in Westville, so I know this area very, very well. And I drive through it constantly. And I never realized how many residential properties there were in the area. In other words, I didn't realize how much this was a neighborhood already.
It's going to be
and how much more it's going to be a neighborhood.
It's going to be another Westville.
This is not a bad thing, because it creates that kind of mix. Districts that are exclusively commercial districts roll up the mats at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the evening. But areas that have residential have a lot more potential for the restaurants to stay open late, for some of the businesses to stay open late, to keep the lights on, and to really make a kind of lively, safe, and safety is part of it as well, safe feeling. Because
that's what you're getting.
Well, I hope so. I mean, that's important, because people, I mean, one of the things about encouraging people to get out of their car is that if they don't feel safe, they ain't going to do it. It's a non-starter. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, maybe you address this. I'm assuming the blue line on top is Bradley Road.
That's Bradley Road.
Okay, so we've been told, and I don't know if this is the case, that it's impossible to install a traffic light there. Is that the case? Do we know that? It looks like that's becoming a major artery.
You mean right here?
Yeah.
Well, it is a major artery
Right.
because it's one of the few connectors. And
Absolutely, but it's impossible to actually use it as an artery. Is it possible, given the grade, to install a traffic light on Amity Road at that intersection?
You mean right here where people are coming down the hill?
Yeah, yes.
Well, I mean, what does possible mean? It means that if you do it, you have to do other things to prepare people to stop.
Okay.
And it takes a while for that to become part of the pattern. If it were me, I would find a way for sure, if not to stop people starting at Bradley Road, to slow them down as much as possible. Because if you're going to have any level of commercial activity, if you're going to have any level of pedestrian activity in this area, I mean, even the level you already have is not entirely comfortable with the impatience of people moving through that intersection. And Judy mentioned Westville Village before. Well, yeah, it's a bottleneck. But ask the business owners whether they like the bottleneck. You know, it's their address. And so some of us remember the days when we used to drive across the country on US roads, like 40, all the way across the country. And every little town that you come to would neck down to a 2-3 lane main street with a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit, and you'd slow down and go through the town. You might stop, you might not, and then off you'd go.
And you're addressing the function of these roads now, is whether they're just an expressway to get to work, or this is a part of us.
The other thing that I think is important is if you can have, the reason we did this red-blue is because what we're looking for are two connected but independent networks. A network of streets that are mainly for local traffic, including pedestrian traffic, that allow the major streets to function more smoothly, so that they are not also forced to be the local circulation, the immediately local circulation at the same time. That's the theory. I haven't looked at it long enough to know, and you'd want a traffic planner to look at it as well, but I think the theory is sound. Again, that you create some redundancy in the system and you designate certain streets for local traffic, and they're the places where it's most comfortable for pedestrians to walk, and the other streets are what they are.
Well, it's so encouraging. We have this quarter-mile radius, which I never, heard of before. But that's really encouraging. It's just a wonderful thing to have because it gives opportunity for pedestrians. If Americans walk 10 minutes, we'll do that.
Yeah, I mean,
we've got it. It's our commercial district.
Where it comes from is it comes from two things. It comes from planning theory from the 1920s on neighborhood design. The neighborhood unit in classical planning theory was within a quarter-mile walkable radius. And in that theory, what was at the center of that radius was an elementary school. So that the idea was that a neighborhood should be laid out so that children could walk to the local elementary school comfortably and safely from anywhere in the neighborhood. So the theory was you kept the arterial traffic at the perimeter of the neighborhood, and within the neighborhood you had a network of local streets focused on the elementary school. Later on, in recent years, that theory's been expanded to include what's called transit-oriented development. And the idea that if you invest in public transit, whether it's light rail or bus, rapid transit, whatever it is, that within a quarter to a half mile of the station, that is where you should increase the density of development as much as possible, or allow the density to increase, because that's the radius within which people comfortably walk to the station rather than bring a car to the station. So it's a win-win situation in that respect. So the quarter-mile circle you'll see on a lot of plans now that are pursuing transit-oriented options. Now that's not quite what's going on here, but someday the streetcars may run out to Westville again. Who knows?
Have you looked at the bus stops? I think we have to.
We have a bus map,
right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's worth thinking about. You know, bus is
JCC.
Yeah, it turns around and goes back.
We have very primitive attitudes about buses in this country. In other parts of the world, Europe, South America, bus transit is hugely popular.
Right. But I think it's surprising in this area. I worked in New Haven, I don't know, whenever. But I would park my car at Stop and Shop and take the B bus and Stop and Shop. They permitted it sort of where the bank was, and take the B line down. And there were a group of us. There had to be 7, 8, maybe that's not a lot, but 7, 8, 9 people from Woodbridge that did it routinely.
Yeah.
I think there's, you know, and I think that's going to become more popular. You'd have to deal with parking.
When I was growing up in another part of the country, my parents and grandparents took the bus all the time.
All the time. Yeah.
All the time. Not because they didn't have a car, but because it was a convenient way to get around.
But there again, I think for here, it's where you park that becomes one of the issues.
Well, I think your point, Diane, I think it's an important point, and it's one that I'm very sensitive to. I will tell you that we have never gone into a community where the retailers in that community haven't told us when we asked them what the issues were. Issue number one, we don't have enough parking. And usually what they were referring to is the fact that at a given moment, a customer could not park in that 1 or 2 parking spaces right in front of their store. And of course what that points to is not that you know, they were doing something wrong, or even that the town was doing something wrong, but that their perception was that either their business wasn't strong enough or the environment wasn't good enough that anybody who had to walk more than 10 feet wouldn't go to their store. Now, if you're picking up your laundry, that may be true.
Right, or your groceries.
Right, or, well, of course, interestingly, you know what Stop and Shop uses? 300 feet. They want all, they have a formula. They want all of, and most grocery stores do this, they want all of their parking within a 300-foot radius from the main entrance to the store. And that they've determined people will comfortably push a shopping cart. Now 300 feet is a long way. If you walk down the sidewalk, you'd walk from a New York City block, to give you an idea, is 200 by 800 feet. The blocks along the avenues are 200 feet. Downtown New Haven, the blocks are roughly 400 feet from one corner, and those are fairly big blocks. So 300 feet's a long walk. But of course, they design the parking so that people will feel comfortable doing that. And of course, still people try to, obviously, they'll circle the parking lot 10 times to find the space as close as possible. And that's with a cart full of groceries. So I think we need to start applying similar standards. I mean, we understand that somebody's not going to take a grocery cart from a shopping center and push it a quarter mile to their house. That they're going to do that in a car. But if they go up to the corner to buy a newspaper, get a cup of coffee, or do those sorts of things, those kinds of things are not only comfortable pedestrian activities, they're healthy and good pedestrian activities. And I think the kind of active senior housing that seems to be developing in this area, that population does that, or wants to do that. So anyway, that's my preliminary theory about all of this, and we will, of course, with your encouragement and your assistance, go back and start to look at different options, different scenarios for all of this, if you think it's a concept that's worth pursuing.
Well, that's it. It's 7, so we probably.
I think it's a good time to stop.
But what's our next step? Do you want a work session?
Here's what I would suggest we do. That I get you the slides, that you put them somewhere where they're accessible to the people you want them to be accessible to. You know, in the town. I mean, you can put them anywhere you want to, but you use your judgment about that. Or I can get you a handout that's a printed version of the PowerPoint presentation if you'd rather keep it
Why don't you do that, and we can circulate that.
Can you send it electronically so that?
Well, that's what he said he could. yeah.
Easily.
Okay.
But
So
we
then
could also, we
just
could also
prefer-
do a kind of 8.5 by 11 handout of the PowerPoint.
Which do you prefer?
Well, it's up to you guys.
Well, I think you need all, I think you should
Yes.
have all of them, so that if we want to look at it at home, because that's, when we have the time, we can look at it on the
Yeah.
PowerPoint.
Good.
And if people actually are viewing this on the channel and want to come in and take a look, they can
Right.
have access to it.
So we could do that, and I think, we will put very carefully on it that this is all just pie in the sky at this point.
Discussion.
For discussion. And then I am comfortable with one of two strategies at this point. We could schedule the next meeting next month, and we'll come back with some more information. One of the things we want to look at, for instance, is parking counts in this area. So we could do that, or we could do something that is a more roll up your sleeves session, where we schedule a time where people can come if they are able, and we really sit around a table together with plans and look at things in a little bit more detail, and people start to tell me where there are issues and where there are things that we need to address.
Has the economic person gotten involved?
Yes.
He has, so
He
he's
is
all-
actually, and in fact, I should have mentioned that, he's actually looking at a couple of scenarios that we've sketched out, and also gathering general market data for this area and the surrounding area. So that could well be available at the next meeting.
It seems to me what you want to do is get on the table your, general ideas about this, and then have a discussion about it. So if you have more presentation to make, then...
Well, as I say, to tell you the truth, we've sort of jumped ahead into phase 2 with this. In other words, and this often happens, and I think I warned you about that we're going along, and either because of something one of you says or something that we discover, instead of sort of pacing ourselves and just doing analysis and then moving on to design, we've actually jumped ahead to thinking about some design ideas. And as long as you're comfortable with that, we're certainly comfortable with running with it.
So you're suggesting then that we have a work session? Is that?
I think what I would love to do is to have a meeting. I mean, we could do it just like this, but what I'd like to do is make our discussion the only thing on the agenda.
Right, we'll do that, yeah.
So we can start straight in, and instead of bringing slides, I'll bring drawings that we'll lay out on the table, and we'll look at it in that way.
What's the best time for you as a group to get together? Is 5 o'clock not good? Is 7 o'clock better?
7 o'clock's much better for me.
Is that true with every people who are here?
Yeah, evening is better.
Doesn't matter.
How about you?
Depending on the day, I'm comfortable with either one.
And I think it is easier, it seems just seeing people coming and going later is better.
The other thing I can do, if this is not a kind of sacrilege, is to do it on a Saturday sometime.
We're available on a Saturday.
This time of year, Saturday morning
morning.
isn't an issue.
I don't think so.
Yeah, because then everybody's relaxed and informal, and you haven't,
Right.
you haven't got a whole day of work behind you.
It's tough for me
You
to
can
pick on a
actually,
Saturday.
yeah.
Me too.
Because of the kids.
We'll provide daycare.
For all four?
So we'll keep
So-
it in the evenings.
We actually do that in some cases.
No,
When
we
we're
wanna
trying
do-
to organize town meetings, we'll get something going for the kids off on the side, but this is
Is anticipating a month from now, let's say, the last Wednesday in April, that kind of thing, or something like that?
That
Or
would
you want
be
to do it
fine.
before then?
No, I think maybe I will look at our calendar. Well, the end of April, we're already getting into the end of classes, and I was actually hoping at the next session to bring a couple of my staff along
Okay.
to get involved as well.
Well, just suggest a date, a week before that, or you're talking about May?
Yeah, I'll look at my calendar and I'll email Jerry
Okay.
with a couple of
So
possibilities.
then look, probably it seems like a weeknight, 7 or so, And I
Okay.
think we should expect to be here. This took 2 hours, so we could.
Well, that's
expect
because
it.
we had other things. And
Yeah.
I think we want to concentrate on what Alan has to say.
But
Yeah.
an hour
Yeah.
to 2 probably.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And we can go back, one of the things we can go back to do is to look at some of the projects that I showed you in a little bit more detail so that you can sort of say, yeah, I like that. That looks like something that might be applicable in Woodbridge.
Just an aside, are you looking at, on the side coming down Amity Road? And I'm just a novice very novice city planner. It seems to me that the retail there, the commercial there is underutilized.
This.
Yes.
Yeah,
we
we think so too. And I think it's got some interest, it's got an interesting mix of businesses. But it feels like you're in the back of the world.
Right, but like starting from pretty far up, where you have that gorgeous view. I mean, I see that like mixed use there personally.
We've got some interesting ideas about that property up on the hill, because it's not only do you have good views from up there, it's got incredible visibility from the highway.
Not even the one that the multicolored one that we looked at, but even there's some across from Bradley Road. There's some single or double-story commercial that also has that amazing view.
Yeah.
That also seems to me would be better used or more efficient use.
I agree. Yeah.
I do have one question, and that is, we're looking at one concept here, and when we get together as a group, are things wide open again, or we just want further travel?
We did this fairly quickly because it emerged and we drew it up. What we would typically do, and what we will go back and do, is to look at 3 or 4 options for how you configure things.
Right.
What are the different, because I think it is a better discussion, actually, if you're saying, well, I like option A for this reason, I like option B. Typically, the way these plans emerge, we'll look at some options together, and there'll be things about each of them that people like, and we'll try to put the best of all of them together. That's a productive way of doing it. Okay, good. Yeah.
No objection to adjourn then?
Sounds good.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thanks.